Hello and welcome to KingstonCitizens.org's Roundtable. What's the process? We record and broadcast the program each week so far, where we tackle local City of Kingston and Ulster County topics, typically with a range of guests and always with co-hosts. Lynn hasn't been with us in a little bit, but she'll be back. Lynn Eckert, and my name's Rebecca Martin, and I am co-founder of KingstonCitizens.org and current director at the platform as well.
And I'm Jennifer Schwartz Berky, supporter of Kingston Citizens for over 10 years and an urban planner, as well as a former county legislator in Ulster County.
And we are hot. It is hot out. Right, we're dying. Where's our fans? And to learn more about KingstonCitizens.org, you can visit www.kingstoncitizens.org. Next week, we have a really cool show taking on the discussion of dams. And the topic title is The Problems and the Process of Dam Removal. And we're going to be joined by George Jackman, PhD, who is the senior habitat restoration manager at Riverkeeper and is just so passionate about his work. So it'll be great to have him on. I know everybody will enjoy him. But tonight we are taking on a matter that I think is pretty complicated in the city of Kingston and also in Ulster County. The title is The Problems, I'm sorry, that's not it. The title is Why Single Stream Recycling Can't Move Us to Zero Waste. And we have a guest tonight, Tracy Frisch, who is an independent journalist and citizen activist, who is joining us from her home in Argyle, New York. I'm going to bring her in. She's on the phone tonight. Tracy, are you there?
I sure am.
Tracy, thank you so much for joining us tonight. We wish we could see you, but we understand that when you're in remote areas, it's sometimes difficult to get Wi-Fi.
Right. We're expecting to get service in my rural neighborhood by the end of the summer, and I'm crossing my fingers.
Great. And we're joined tonight, Tracy, by my co-host, Jennifer Schwartz Berky.
Hi,
Tracy.
Jennifer.
Hi.
So Tracy, I wanted to read a short bio about you, just to give the listeners a sense of who you are. And before I do, you are located in Argyle, New York. Is that right?
It is, yes. I'm about an hour north of Albany on the east side of the Hudson River in the county, Washington County, New York, which has the most cows in the Hudson Valley. Dairy cows.
Great. Well, Tracy is joining us, and I can give a little background on how I fortunately met her just recently. So Tracy is an independent journalist and a longtime citizen activist who has organized around recycling, composting, and zero waste on numerous occasions. Let me open this up. Speaking of Wi-Fi issues, we've been having them too with everybody home. In 1988, as a graduate student in you got to help me say
entomology.
Thank you. At Cornell University, she organized a grad student staff group, which within 3 months persuaded Cornell to institutionalize recycling, which up until then was carried out ad hoc by a local junkyard and by students living in Ecology House. She served as the founding executive director for 2 organizations, the New York Coalition for Alternatives to Pesticides and the Regional Farm and Food Project. In March of 2019, she started the Clean Air Action Network of Glen Falls, which is working to shut down the trash incinerator in Hudson Falls and is creating an action plan for a county-operated food waste composting operation and developing zero waste initiatives. For her livelihood, she writes on ecological agriculture, the environment, and social issues. Tracy was the general contractor and main laborer for the small passive solar house in Argyle, New York, where she's calling us from today, where she lives. She also grows all of her own vegetables and barters for eggs and grass-fed beef. And Tracy, I know you're the proud owner of a few new goats. So
Yes. My
welcome
new
to our program.
responsibility.
So I met Tracy. So one of my jobs, and it's my primary job, is that I work for Riverkeeper in the water quality program each day. And in a roundabout way, solid waste management has come into my sphere. It actually came up a few years ago when the city of Kingston was confronted with the reality of there being a change, and maybe it even occurred sooner, Tracy, where China started to reject taking materials, recycled materials, in general, speaking in generalities.
Yeah, let me comment on that because we look at that as, just some evil thing that China has done, but actually I think it's much healthier to look at that as a wake-up call. We've been sending more and more contaminated batches of recyclables by ship to China, and China got what they needed. I mean, they processed a lot of materials, and it helped jumpstart their economy in certain ways. And then there's a lot of pressure in China. There's a large grassroots movement against incineration, against air pollution, and basically to clean up the environment in China because it's pretty bad in many ways. And so China said, this crap you're sending us really doesn't have value, and we're not going to take it. If you want to send us stuff, it can only have a very small amount of contamination. So, but in the meantime, in the last, say, 20 years, the large integrated waste corporations like Waste Management and Republic, you've probably seen those names on trucks and dumpsters and such, they decided that there was a new profitable sphere where they can outcompete their competitors, and that was by going to municipalities and saying, we're going to offer no sort single stream recycling. It's going to cost you less. We can just pick it up in one truck, so you'll pay less for it. And so they made themselves attractive to mayors and city councils around the country and got the business. And but what they didn't tell anyone is that sorting all this mixed up recyclables, often with a good dose of garbage in it, is an extremely costly proposition, and it's not very attractive to the end users. So whereas recyclables used to have a great deal of value, and there were many paper mills that took post-consumer paper that had already been used, say, in an office or cardboard or different plastics, etc. Once single stream got into place, there was a decline in infrastructure in this country. So a lot of paper mills were really not interested in post-consumer paper that had fragments of glass embedded in it and pieces of plastic and residue from soft drinks and God knows what else mixed in, because that really made it much harder for them to recycle. Some years ago, I even read an industry article that was brought to my attention. I don't remember which recycled industry, but they're like ranting against single stream because it was really destroying the quality. So we sent it to China instead, and China, after some time, said, we don't want this stuff either.
Well, in the
Um,
city of Kingston, we went to trying to remember what exactly it was. I mean, we always had pickups from our home, but we did have to some separating, and around 2009 or so, maybe 2008, the city was looking at different methods to try to reduce the trash at the landfill here, and we can talk
mhm.
about that in a sec. And single stream came came through after pay as you throw was discussed. There was a initiative called Recycle Bank, which I think you and I have talked about before, that was discussed. But it was the single stream system that the city of Kingston invested in. And in 2011, um, they invested approximately $1 million to move towards single stream. The city of Kingston's garbage is managed by an authority, the Ulster County Recovery Resource Authority. Jenny, the authority itself is governed or run, it has a board, it has an executive director. What is the role of the legislature for the authority, for UCRA, or the county? Because
Well, there is a certain amount of funding that goes to UCRA, the Ulster County Resource Recovery Agency, through the legislature, but then it is managed at an arm's length. So they appoint all of the board members, and then the board hires the executive director. But again, their decision-making process is not entirely dependent upon the legislature, as I said, because it has this degree of independence. And that's the purpose of having an authority. It's governed by its own bylaws, and it makes its own independent decisions. And and it is a political body, however, because the board members are, and the committee, those who advise the legislature, are appointed by the legislature.
right, and also,
And 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 I should say our group, the Clean Air Action Network, and our Zero Waste Committee, which has been meeting now twice a month. It's a citizens committee that we started in last September. We have had some close contact with UCRA on food waste processing and composting,
Mhm.
and they've been extremely helpful.
yeah.
They have a really great program on that, and it's been an inspiring model. But I'm not very familiar with the rest of their activities.
Well,
Um,
yeah, and UCRA, I wanted to also add that the legislature also plays a role in their solid waste management plan, right? They're involved. There's a recycling oversight committee that can usher in new plastics or what have you that the authority would recycle, even though that would require probably quite an investment, but of just to and the recycling market has changed, and I think is going to continue to change, probably in.
with all the fracking, yeah, there's been a glut of natural gas and oil, and so that's really influenced the recycling market for plastics.
Right, and so it's really important. The city of Kingston, the community members don't go to a transfer station probably. They have their roadside pickup, house side pickup. The city's talking about, creating a composting program. But in 2011, suddenly we were given one big bucket where we were
Mhm.
urged to put everything in there. Suddenly, we went from separating some there, even though I think the city thinks that there's a real savvy community of recycling folks who understand recycling in Kingston. I think that in a way the single stream process diminished any of that because we.
Well, I would say that single stream is a dumbing down. It takes away people's responsibility, and there have been numerous studies, and I've read about them in places like the New York Times and environmental publications that found they all have the same results. That with dual stream, when you have the fiber in one bin, and that would be like paper and cardboard, And the containers, plastic containers and glass containers and aluminum and tin cans in another, there's like a 3% or a very low contamination rate because it's really clear what goes into what bin. But when they go to single stream, contamination is in the teens to 25%.
Right.
And so that means that maybe 1/4 of the stuff going to the processing facility that sorts it is garbage on arrival. And then there's also the diminished quality of some of the other materials. As I was saying, they're embedded with other stuff or they're, you know. So there's a phenomenon that I only heard of in the last couple of years called wish cycling, but it's really people who want to do the right thing. So they say, well, this might be recyclable, so I'll put it in the bin. And pretty soon, everything's going in the bin.
Well,
Right.
I think totally.
And it's all like well-intentioned on the part of the residents, but it's creating, you know, as our friend Neil Feldman says, it's creating the recycling container is just becomes a second garbage bin for many people because they get confused, and it's easy to blame the people, but people are capable of recycling. It's the structure that messes people up. And I want to use an analogy that I heard a number of years ago that stuck with me. So I think single stream is like a teenager's messy room and everything on the floor. And recyclables have value. That's what the point is. But they have value because of the purity of a bunch of stuff together that's the same. And if you mix everything together, it's not very valuable. So if someone has food and clothes and books and papers and garbage all mixed together, it's horrifying, and it's like really discouraging. And that's what single stream. A group of us from involved with Honest Weight Food Co-op in Albany took a field trip 2 summers ago to the processing center in Albany, which is owned by the third or fourth largest integrated waste corporation in America, Waste Connections. And Waste Connections, like all these big companies, they have landfills and they have transfer stations and they have collection services and they have these MRFs, these material recycling facilities, which don't recycle, they just sort. And they have some high tech and they're very expensive to build these things. And they have mostly people of color workers that are temps. And there's even a temp agency that's active nationally in many cities that specializes in the waste industry. And in Albany, they have an office on the property of this facility. And people stand there with ear protectors and fluorescent vests and steel-toed boots, and they stand there and they grab things coming down the conveyor belt, and everyone has a job to throw a different thing in a different place.
Jenny, was that true at Accra? Have you toured the site before, the Ulster County Recovery Resource Authority?
Yeah, because they have a processing center too.
Right, and I've been there. I was wondering, I think Jenny was on mute. What I wanted to say is single stream in Kingston when it happened, I think everybody pretty much didn't understand what was happening, except that suddenly it seemed easier, right?
Right.
Yeah.
And and for years. So this began in around 2011, and it wasn't until 2018 where there was a press release that came out from the mayor of Kingston. There was the introduction of the problem with China accepting our materials, as you and I agree. I think it's. I'll get to that really briefly because I do want to move into zero waste in a minute. But we found out that everything was about to change, and it was in the mid cycle of our municipal budget, where there was
Mm-hmm.
a problem with accepting the single stream materials. Um, the costs, now it was becoming more of a burden for the authority, and we went over to take a look at it, and it was really in that moment that I realized what a significant problem this seemed to be as a community member, to see
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's really interesting. And
pile
in fact,
but one
I
second,
just want to,
I just want to say one thing before I,
oh, sure, sure, go ahead.
the pile of materials was completely mixed in a mess, and I thought, and contaminated everything, right? And I
And
wondered,
it probably smelled horrible.
yeah, it did, and it was in the middle of the floor, and the contrast was that behind it were all these bales of things, fibers,
Mm-hmm.
glass,
Mm-hmm.
and there we realized that the sorting wasn't done there. That was its first stop. The second place it went was it was picked up by more trucks and hauled outside of the county to a
Mm-hmm.
processing facility. Um, there are two, and we've discussed one in Albany, one in Beacon, and I think our materials went there, where they would separate the materials, and I guess send whatever else they could across, overseas to China or wherever else it went to. But what was striking to me to learn was that as soon as the garbage left the county, that we no longer had control over what happened to it. So
Oh, oh,
whether it
interesting.
becomes trash or whether it because it's recycled, there are laws that are county to county that you know that this was my understanding that in Dutchess County or in Albany County, we wouldn't have any sense of what happened to it. It could all end up in the ocean for all we know, or in a
Yeah,
landfill.
I'm going to give you a vivid something that stuck with me. So we toured the facility. We walked on the catwalk or whatever. Um, it was warm weather. We were wearing closed-toed shoes as required, but it was like really filthy and stinky. And then we went outside where they had a staging area and stuff. And I said, "What's that pile?" There was this multicolored mound, small mountain of stuff. And they said, "Oh, that's the glass." I'm like, "Why is it all these vivid colors?" And they said, "Oh, that's the plastic mixed in it. That goes to a landfill for landfill roads." Now, that's not recycling.
Right.
But, and they told us about some really strange things that they found in in the mixed recyclables, like a rocket launcher,
Right. I'm
um,
sure.
plastic bags which
Yeah, it's
screw up the machinery, and all this other stuff, and it's like cell phone batteries which catch on fire. I mean, it was like a nightmare.
right. And so the UCRA facility, by contrast, was extremely organized, very
I bet.
this big pile of contaminated materials. And so, you mentioned their composting efforts, and they're growing. And so I think they were pretty anxious to get the materials out. They were costing more and more money for them to not only transfer out to a facility for proper uh, handling, whatever that could possibly mean with a pile like that. But it was also taking up space for storage of materials
Mhm.
that values change, and for composting. So we have since then, Tracy, just to kind of get to the end game, that over the years has been a lot of resistance in the executive branch's office with transitioning back to dual stream. But
Mhm.
we really had to for financial reasons, but we have to because it's our responsibility to take care of the things that, the upstream, downstream um, uh, costs of the materials that we use for our food, for, et cetera, whatever it is, everything is packaged today. And so Kingston's in a great situation, even though this is a very challenging moment. It's a great moment to do something really profound, where the public can really engage in this conversation and where we can move to something called zero waste. And so you and I met around a solid waste management project, and I'm so grateful, and I've been learning a lot working with you. And I wondered, maybe, Jenny, do you agree we should start there? Like, this is a golden opportunity, as challenging as it is, and we're still in the midst of it because UPRA came down again recently on fiber that was from businesses that have been picked up. It sounds like it was occurring on a municipal pickup day. There was still contamination, making cardboard
Yes.
not useful. So we've just taken another hit as of June the 1st, where those materials will no longer be accepted as they were. And I'm not sure where the city is now in that way, but it's definitely a moment of, it's as Tracy said, we've had a series of wake-up calls in the city of Kingston on recycling.
And this is ubiquitous. This is going on all over the country. I just want to say a couple things. When single stream was sold to municipalities and to residents and businesses, it was sold on, it will increase your recycling rate. And it does increase often the amount of stuff that's picked up, but it's not really the recycling rate unless it's capable of being recycled. So it's a big illusion. In the city of Albany, Sierra Processing, the MRF, the processing facility at the Port of Albany, started 2 years ago, I think it was, started charging the city $400,000 a year for processing. It used to be free because they were able to sell the materials. But with the crash in the market because of all the contamination, they couldn't, and instead, single stream was no longer cheap, right? Because now it was a big item in the budget. The other thing I want to talk about is just kind of an analogy. When we lead our lives, we sort things. We don't go to the supermarket and the farmer's market and just throw everything in the refrigerator. At least most people don't. You put the produce in the produce drawer, and you put the cheese in one place, and you put the meat in the freezer, and you etc. If we did, it would be compost soon, right? We do our laundry and we fold it and we put it in different categories. I mean, we know as a society, we know how to sort things. It's just second nature. Kids learn it in Montessori, right? But for some reason, when it comes to the end life of our stuff, we just have been led to believe out of sight, out of mind, let's just forget about it and throw it in a bin. And that's kind of the source of the problem. So that's kind of all I want to say about that.
Jenny, you're on
but
mute. Jenny's trying.
Excuse me?
Jenny's asking a question, but she's on mute.
Oh, okay. Yeah, I'm sorry, I can't hear.
I'm sorry. I wanted to go back to a bigger question, which relates
Sure.
to, whether it's recyclable or not, where we are going with the quantity of things that we consume in the first place. I know you're talking about zero waste, but
Well, it is very related to zero waste. I
Yes.
mean, recycling is not the first step in zero
Right.
waste. It's like the last step.
Right. And so when we were exploring pay as you throw back in, I think, 2008, and actually Rebecca was very passionate about it, there seemed to be a lot of arguments made against it as if it would be too expensive. But I was just wondering if there is data that expresses, you said that somewhere in the single digits for
You just can do
recycling
a
for
Google,
single stream. But
yes, I can send you some articles or send Rebecca some articles. Yep.
Yeah, I was just wondering how much do people end up, how much less do people end up consuming and throwing out as a result of that? Just sort of general for our audience to understand.
Well, I don't know that there's data on that, but if you're pseudo recycling and putting stuff in that isn't recyclable, you're not serving any good purpose.
Right.
So, but the first, pay as you throw, there's a great deal of documented evidence that it reduces the amount of materials per household that goes for disposal, whether in a landfill or an incinerator.
Mm-hmm.
The state of Massachusetts has been in one of the states in the forefront on this, and they have dozens of case studies, and they were even providing incentives to municipalities that went to pay as you throw, and then they would do a case study that, I don't have the figures in front of me, that, X city reduced the amount of stuff that went for disposal by 30%, because suddenly people they pay for, there's different mechanisms that I won't go into, but if you put bags out, and they have to be bags that you purchase from the city. In some cases you can buy them from stores, but they're regulation bags, and they pay for the disposal. And if you're knowing you have to do that, then you're going to try to not throw out as much. So that's really considered the gold standard, the first step towards reducing the amount of stuff that people throw away.
Right.
One of the things that people have been concerned about, Jenny, that I've heard with this, because it's come up again, is that, some people can't afford the bags. But I think
there's mechanisms for low income people.
Of course, and in the tipping fees these days, if Tracy, can you speak just a little bit on that? I think it's sort of a mystery to the public how they're paying for trash now.
Right.
Well, in Ulster County, UCRA, the waste authority charges $105 a ton to haulers or municipalities bringing in waste for disposal, not recyclables and not food waste or yard waste. Those have different, much lower fees to incentivize the diversion from disposal. But UCRA pays a lot less than $105. UCRA has facilities, and so UCRA has a great, I think a really great system where they use that fee to subsidize recycling, their processing, their recycling education, their composting, probably toxic waste collection and other hazardous waste collection days and other initiatives. Other counties, like the one that I'm working with, Warren County, where Glens Falls is located, they have no involvement these days except for having some town-run transfer stations, so they have no source of funds. And I know I'm getting off the topic, but disposal in landfills varies tremendously. The farther west you go away from the population centers, the cheaper it is. In some places it might be $25 or $30 a ton. In other places it might be $50. One of my motivations for being involved in this is to close down the incinerator, which is one of the most polluting types of facilities around. And there's no longer any public involvement, but we have a couple of numbers, $58 and $70 per ton for disposal.
But that's the first stop. The garbage is actually not left at UCRA, right? It travels.
So the garbage that's taken to UCRA is taken to a landfill in central New York, and I think their tipping fee is quite low. Mm-hmm. Like maybe 20s or 30s dollars per ton. Land is less valuable out there. Right. Landfilling isn't the greatest thing to do, but
what a footprint that is, though. How far is Seneca Meadows from UCRA?
About 10 hours.
10 hours?
Yeah.
No, that's not true. It's probably 3 or 4 hours. It's in central New York.
Seneca Falls?
Yeah, Seneca Falls is like near Syracuse.
Oh, not 10 hours. Okay, sorry. Long trip.
It's
Long
it's
trip.
it's maybe 3 hours at the most, but
Okay.
and they talk about in their composting program how much greenhouse gases they've saved by not taking X number of trips.
Mhm.
Right.
Um,
So it's good for the public to understand that their waste goes from their homes. It's taken to Accra. Now there's the dual stream, but there were actually two pathways. When it was single stream, it would then say be piled on the floor at Accra and then transported out of the county to Beacon to there
mhm.
be sorted and sent overseas. So that's how our garbage had been managed until a couple of years ago now. And maybe that was recyclables and not our garbage. I think our garbage has been going to Seneca Meadows all along. And so in trucks and the transportation costs and everything else, and that's just a long journey. And our garbage leaving even our community. So we're not even taking responsibility for the things we're consuming and throwing.
But let me just say, if anyone gets the idea that having a local incinerator is a better idea, think again,
We
Right.
don't,
because that is the most polluting way you can deal with garbage.
and I'm
As
very
bad as the
yeah.
as bad as a landfill is.
So one of the
Worse, I think.
yeah
I
it's
mean, the emissions alone.
yeah, and it's been a conversation, and it's definitely not going to get anywhere around here. So
I hope not.
no. But one of the
I just have one other question about Seneca. They're going to run out of space. I took a group of legislators there a few years ago, and we visited all of its very state-of-the-art methods, and I mean it's just massive. But from what I understand, they're going to be running out of space in a handful of years. So what do you know what the plan is once that happens?
Can I inject something? So a week ago, last Thursday, we had an incredibly inspiring speaker on a Zoom call, and the recording will be available soon. It was Paul Connett, who's a emeritus professor of chemistry and environmental toxicology and a very well-known anti-incineration campaigner, but he's also been working on zero waste internationally. And he told us about municipalities, the numbers of municipalities in Italy, of all places, that have reached 80 to 90% waste diversion. So we don't associate that kind of practice with Italy. We'd probably think more Scandinavia, but there's incredible enthusiasm and creativity. And so if your county and your community could get on that bandwagon and start, and Paul Connett wrote a book about it, published by Chelsea Green in 2013, and was in a film about this. And
yeah, we want to get there in a second, but we're still riding the train here to get there. Because
yeah. But it's just like, I mean, to start talking about that as you're doing today is the first step, because, and it's usually citizen activists that
President Trump returned to the campaign trail last.
About that. Whoops. I think the Seneca Meadows question, my understanding is that that I don't know. I mean, I suppose they can just keep piling up, but just going up. But my understanding is that sometime between 2022 and 2025 that the landfill will be full. And I've heard in this community as we circle around to this idea of taking advantage of this time period to think as a community through what we can do, um, based on models, right? Based on the things that others are doing. We don't have to reinvent the wheel here, but I've heard our mayor say that that single stream that will come back in the materials will become valuable again. in time. And I'm just curious because we also hear the opposite. I've heard, you know, many opportunities to listen to Judith Ank, who talks about it not ever returning, that the recycling market is, in fact, going to become, I don't know if the term is worse than it is now, but it will continue to become challenging markets to find markets to sell materials to. So I think, would you say it's a fair assessment that the public really, we need to start understanding the situation so that we can participate, because things are not going to go back to the way that they've been. Is that fair to say?
I don't think I have enough information to make an assessment, but I think putting the stress on organics, processing clean organics into compost, and reuse and reduction and producer responsibility, where there's pressure put on manufacturers and brands not to have so much packaging, and that's beginning to happen. I think those are avenues to explore. We've gotten so hung up on recycling as the only area to advocate on, but it's these other areas that are where perhaps greater strides can be made. And if we go to reusable containers instead of recyclable containers, I mean, there's a movement against single-use disposable, and there has to be a movement against single-use recyclable, because there's a lot of energy that goes into recycling. You're trucking it, you're heating it, you're molding it and all that, and then you're transporting it to some other place. So how can we move towards reusable containers? I think needs to be our question. And I think we forget there's tremendous models out there. There's communities all over the world that have done great things. And just taking any models and replicating them in your community is a good step forward. But we have to look at the diversity of, we have to stop thinking of waste as waste. It's a resource. Waste degrades, thinking of it as waste degrades it and creates that contamination mentality.
What is you live in Argyle, you're near Glens Falls, and the Wheelabrator incinerator, there's one in Hudson Falls, right?
Yes, it's about it's about 18 miles from my house, but we definitely get dioxin fallout on the pastures where cows graze in my county.
Can you tell us a little bit about whose idea? How did that? I mean, in our area, like what was the logic there?
Well, okay. Back in the 80s, the DEC was closing landfills. Landfills were every town had a landfill. They were unlined, they were unmonitored, and they were leaking. But they decided that incineration was the answer. And incinerators are huge capital projects, and there's a lot of money to be made in developing them. There's bonds that are sold, there's permits and consultants and all kinds of things like that. And in Warren and Washington County, there was a guy who was the developer, and then he formed a partnership with a local attorney who ran for the Board of Supervisors, which is like our county legislature. And that man became the chair of the Solid Waste Committee and then the chair of the county legislature, the county Board of Supervisors, at the same time that he was partners with the developer.
This is in Warren County, you said?
This is in Washington County, but it was initially 3 counties. And I don't remember, I think the third county was in Adirondack County, So it was Warren and Washington. Now, both Warren and Washington currently have like 65,000 people each as residents. The incinerator is a small incinerator. 500 tons of garbage is burned a day, but our two counties do not produce anything like that amount of garbage. So it was owned by an authority like UCRA, the Industrial Development Agency of Warren and Washington County, and they are a somewhat secretive organization that thinks they're not.
The IDA,
that,
the incineration process?
Yes, they owned the incinerator for the first 20, it was supposed to be 20 years, but they owned it for like 22 or 23. And they had a contract with a private operator, which was initially, I'm forgetting the name of the company, but there was a lot of shakeup in the incinerator industry, and the company was bought by Waste Management, and then Wheelabrator was sold off from Waste Management, if I remember correctly. So for over 20 years, the counties had to pay the difference. They basically had to make good the company that was operating it. They had to make sure that that company could make a profit and had enough garbage to operate at full capacity. And so I used to go to these meetings in the 2000s. I think I was torturing myself, but where they had supervisors from both Warren and Washington County. It was an inter-county committee, and they met every month in alternating counties. They had a consultant, and they examined the amount of waste coming in and the financials of the operation. And so our tipping fee, I believe, was $69 a ton at that point. But they were taking, they didn't have enough waste from the two counties. So they were taking waste from other counties at $20 or $30 a ton.
Right.
You know, I mean, so we paid millions and millions of dollars over 20 plus years to subsidize this thing. And it cost like $200,000 at the beginning, but it was sold for 200 million. It was sold for 13 million.
So what is just so people understand, burning garbage means plastics, means whatever, right? Or is it?
It's not sorted, and they also burn tires.
Right, like
they burn tires, especially in the winter when the garbage tends to be wet. So, and when they say they make energy, they do make a little electricity, but the U.S. Energy Information Agency, something like that, it's a government federal agency. They did a chart about 10 or 15 years ago that looked at the cost, the energy in and the energy out, and the cost to produce energy using different means, and incineration least efficient means. So there's a lot more energy embodied.
Yeah, and I don't mean to.
There's a lot more energy embodied in the products like the plastics.
There's this new project, or it's not new, but it's a few years old, Bio High Tech, that sounds like a facility that wants to set up in the city of Rensselaer, where they are taking municipal waste and they are removing the valuable, the metals, and then they're drying plastics and fibers, or they're air drying them somehow, and then they're shipping those they shred them into confetti, and then send them to cement facilities where they're burning it for energy.
It's horrible. It's just horrible.
What is this idea? Because it seems like it's definitely on Ulster County's radar, and I'm curious to know. I mean, that's another, I guess, idea that someone has in terms of how to treat and manage municipal waste. And I guess,
These ideas are all ideas for how to make money from garbage. They have nothing to do with the environment. Um, and cement. I mean, it's as horrible, as horrific as incinerators are in producing particulate matter, which is very dangerous not only to the respiratory system but to the circulatory system and even the brain. And it's there's I won't go into the problems with incineration, except for one. People say incineration or landfill. Well, when you incinerate, you need a landfill for the toxic ash, which is 1/3 of the weight of the original material. So it's the worst of every world.
right, it must be very densely concentrated with horrible uh,
Horrible toxics,
toxic
yes.
material. So this is not the solution, and thank you for clarifying that. Um,
No, and there's 2 cement plants in New York State that are operating, and the other one is in Glens Falls, 2 miles from the incinerator. And then there's a paper mill down the road
Oh,
in the city of Glens Falls. So, it's toxic soup in the air, but the cement plant is burning a paper and plastic mixture, and many people commented, in the DEC air permit process, but DEC approved it. Um, they were committed to approving it before public comment, we heard.
why is that?
So
Why is that, Tracy? Why? How can plastics, plastics, burning tires be legal?
I think we have I think we're hopelessly naive, and when you work uh, as a kind of a watchdog, when you're active as a watchdog, you start to realize that even though it's called the Department of Environmental Conservation, um, these these agencies, or the EPA, these agencies have really been captured by the polluters. I'll tell you a quick story. In from in the early 90s, I started with other people, this group, the New York Coalition for Alternatives to Pesticides, and I was on the Pesticide Management Advisory Council, which had mostly industry people from the pesticide companies, from the aerial applicators that went up in airplanes and sprayed pesticides, from agriculture, from pest control companies, et cetera. So I went to all these horrible meetings every 2 months, I believe, for years, 5 years. And the person who was in charge of the division that included pesticides, which was a bureau, he was fond of talking about the regulated community, that is the pesticide users and the companies and stuff, as I'm trying to think what the word was. That was their audience. Those were their customers, not the people who are unwittingly exposed, not the birds, not the the fish. Their customers were the ones who paid the fees, the modest fees, to register pesticides or to get an applicator license. And they were the customers. And that little linguistic thing opened my eyes of who they thought they worked for. They didn't work for us. They didn't work for the public. They didn't work for the environment. They worked for, quote, the regulated community. And this individual was in the hospital. He had some kind of serious condition. I have no idea what it was. And when he came back to his job, he thanked all the industry people for sending him cards and flowers and stuff. I just cannot get that out of my mind. But they don't work for you. They interface all the time with the industry that's asking for permits. They don't spend that kind of time with the general public.
Yeah.
So we have to realize that while that isn't, while these agencies were started with some idealism, they've deviated down a really an unfortunate path.
Yeah,
And
we
we have
noticed that, and I think the community members are really saints when they step in and engage in trying to really unpack a process step by step. You see a lot of the mistakes that are being made, or just the kinds of decisions that are being made without their maybe thinking that they would ever be caught, right? They're just shortcuts. And, but what we really want to do, and you said it earlier, and Jenny, I would love for you to also bring some wisdom to this question for Tracy to answer. We really want to help. I mean, we're all very busy. These times are very difficult. Um, I've said this 3 or 4 times now. I see this as a golden opportunity for us
Mm.
to. I'm sorry for that noise. um,
Mm.
uh, for our community to support the city, who is also working in tandem with the county, and we're working with UCRA, with a really with a changing board, and an executive director who my experience has been really wants the input and wants participation, as does the city, as does the legislature, above and beyond, any of the complications that currently exist. So for the city of Kingston, it's the only city in Ulster County. 24,000 people live here. Um, what is our first step, or first couple of steps that we can start to take to support? And I'll say this, that the county does have a draft solid waste management plan that they're working on now. I just saw a second update from February 2020. The county legislatures are working on a zero waste plan now. There's a lot going on that's really good. We're growing in our composting in the county. The city is looking into composting, but there is a disconnect of the community to their waste. There's no doubt about
Mhm.
it. There has not been enough education done for whatever reason. It's difficult. It could be capacity, it could be funding, or it could be that it hasn't been a priority. So with that in mind, and Jenny, please add to this if there's more to it. We really would love to leave the community on the note of things that they can think about and do to take the steps to support a change.
Yeah, I'll wait to see if Jenny has something to say.
Oh, well, I mean, we've skipped over certain things that I think the public does need to know. One of them is that we really haven't talked about is how much organic matter gets into their trash. And the fact that Kingston had pledged in its climate action plan that by 2020 we would actually have instituted curbside composting, although I am in favor more, and it's not possible for everyone, but for those of us who can, to try and move toward backyard composting, which is really the most most effective in terms of reducing waste. But I also wanted to say that if you look at the county solid waste plan, I don't know if this has changed at this point, but there is still a discussion about whether or to incinerate or not. So I think it's really
Yeah, well, that needs to be off the table immediately,
right.
and I'll send a link within a week of Paul Connett's talk. Paul
Yes.
Connett he is absolutely amazing. He's never taken a penny for his talks, and he's spoken in something like 67 countries around the world.
Yes, and I saw the book, The Zero Waste Solution, that you
Mentioned, yeah.
recommended. But Rebecca will have to show it because I don't have screen sharing.
Yeah.
And I think it would be great for people to learn more about zero waste, although we didn't have time for it in this hour. I think that it's a great opportunity for investment here. I've heard about
and
people
zero waste can create good jobs and meaningful community relationships.
Right.
One of the exciting, there's a couple of exciting things I'll just mention that are zero waste related. One is construction and demolition, which is different than municipal solid waste, the stuff you put out on the curb. It's anything from when you build a material, what's left over that goes in the trash or special waste stream, or when a building is demolished, or when you renovate and it's all the stuff you tear down.
The construction process.
Yes, but there's first, deconstruction is a thing that is being done in many places. There are companies that specialize in it. There are job training programs that teach it and give people a marketable skill. And then there are facilities that people set up, or small companies set up, where you take the stuff that's from demolition, already pre-sorted to the best of your ability, and you further sort it, and some of the stuff can be sold as building materials to reuse. And we all know this, like barn wood or old beams or old flooring, but there's other types of things as well. And so that's the kind of enterprise that could be started locally, and there's a lot of guidance on how to do that. And actually, the most exciting thing is when municipalities establish ordinances that require that companies or renovators or builders pay a bond, and they get that back when they recycle a sufficient amount of materials from their project.
Yeah, I think incentives are a really important part of this formula.
Yeah, so there are many models out there of communities that have done that, and a lot of the materials from demolition are aggregates, bricks and cinder blocks and concrete, and that can easily be reused, whether as bricks or for parking lots or whatever. So there's that, but then there's also wood and a whole variety of other things. And the other thing is reuse centers. And the most exciting model is a place called Urban Ore. I think it's in Berkeley, not in San Francisco. It was started by a college professor who left to do something real. And I think he sold the business now many years later, decades later, to his workers. And they have a thing where they had first dibs on everything going to the transfer station. So they basically could forage and get all kinds of reusable stuff. I visited the place in, probably 30 years ago, and there was just a large lot with all the toilets together, and then the bathtubs and the this and the that, and people could go through, and then there's a lot of indoor space. But so you kind of create this, it's like a giant thrift shop that has a lot of things that thrift shops don't have. But so there's that's kind of the best way to create reuse opportunities.
I guess one second, Jenny. I guess what I'm thinking of is these are big ideas. Some of them I'm hearing, policies, and I'm hearing of ways, and actually some of the things you're describing is in this new zero waste proposal that the county legislature is putting together. I think it's
great.
Joe Green and Laura Pettit. In the city of Kingston, we are needing to advocate for better ways of helping us to understand, the kinds of things that, we want to take advantage too of these new ideas. So, given your experience, Tracy, what kinds of things, given, we've provided the context of where we are now inside of the city of Kingston and the connection to the county?
Well, there's also community composting, and there's trainings available that would be something that could be done at the very local scale. And sometimes when people see, they see it in their neighborhood, they see kids involved in doing it, it gives people more ownership than having stuff taken. I know that to UCRA's site, I know that UCRA at this point is not doing residential composting, only from larger generators, unless people, bring it themselves, but they're not working with local haulers that are picking up curbside.
Right, well, that's
Um,
coming. That's been a conversation with the city, the executive
mhm, mhm.
and DPW are talking about that. Well, I mean,
I know people in part of the city of Northampton, Massachusetts, that have a bicycle hauling cooperative, and people make their livings doing it, and they pick up recyclables and they pick up food waste from individual households. They also do some moving. They have trailers, and somehow it works economically. I mean, it's really an amazing kind of project. It's been going for a number of years.
We have a
So
company in New Paltz that does this, community compost company, and they actually do pick up from residents.
On bicycles?
Oh, I don't know if it's bicycles, but it's a
Yeah.
forward-thinking company, so they may have something like that as well.
they do that.
Yeah, there's just, the sky's the limit in terms of ideas, and if you come up with an idea and you look it up online, you might find a model.
Mm-hmm.
So, I mean, one thing that you might do is get together some people and come up with some topics, and then do some looking. I mean, I could send you in different directions, and other people can as well. And it can be very helpful to have some models and people who can mentor you. And
Yeah, it's almost like water, isn't it? It's like people turn on their taps and drink their water, and they don't really think about where it comes from or even where it goes.
mhm. Yeah. But there's many people who are waste junkies and are really interested.
Right, but I mean, first step is for people to understand. I think what's happening and the size of the problem. I mean,
Well,
incineration.
one way of getting into it is plastics at this point, and there's a great film, The Story of Plastic, I think it's called.
Yes.
I mean, those are motivational, and those films also often contain um, like an introduction to zero waste, as people are doing it in the Philippines. And when you see what people are doing at the grassroots, it puts this country to total shame. And it makes you think, well, how could we do that here? So,
That's a great idea.
I,
We'll share that film.
Mm-hmm.
yeah.
Yeah, there was a very funny quote and something that I think you shared with us that said, if you study garbage, you'll always have a job.
Yeah, Neil Feldman said that. Yes. Yes.
Which I think is true that, all over the world, there are people who actually make their living off of the waste of others, so to speak. And I
Yes.
think we're really behind the times with that, as well as the fact that we generate just like many other problems with our carbon footprint, we generate such a large proportion of the world's trash. I don't even know how much it is. Maybe you could tell us.
I actually don't know, but I think we use a quarter of the world's resources, so
Right. Well, that
it's
makes sense.
probably on par with that.
It's sort of on par with COVID. We are 4%.
Right.
We have 25% of the cases, and I think that's kind of a metaphor for what we
Yeah, good.
do here in terms of our blinders, let's say.
Yes, good point. I think one thing that I'm a little cautious about is sometimes this becomes like, I mean, I've gone to meetings and that we've had that have something to do with zero waste, and someone comes with a takeout container and they're like, don't criticize me. This is not, this goes well beyond individual choice. This is a structural problem, and I don't think we could change things without thinking about policy.
Right. It's not about changing a light bulb again.
Yeah, it's a bigger thing, and we have to facilitate. We need some infrastructure, we need some businesses, we need some policies for people to do the right thing.
Yeah, and
You know, there,
on that note, I want to say you mentioned Neil Seldman, and you introduced us to him. And what I've pulled up here that you can't see is one of the things that we're hoping we can do in order to frame the conversation a little bit better is we've been able to bring on the Institute for Local Self-Reliance, who took a look at the Ulster County solid waste management plans, the one from 2011 and the recent one. It might be a more recent one than 220.
There's an update.
Yeah, so he's been able to look through that and really outline in very clear language the excellent ideas, the need for implementation details and timeline, need to consider additional options, et cetera. And it's great. And I know that Neil also has worked with Ulster County and he's been involved in zero waste trainings, it sounds like. Also,
for like 35 years or something.
right. Okay. Well, this is new. So we're going to share this document, and right now we're talking to the county to see how we can all plug in our interests coming from different worlds, community members, elected officials, agency board members, executive directors, and see if we can um, when you talk about policy, one of the things we have to look at is Ulster County and UCRA. And
Yes.
and that's a good starting point for this community to understand where their waste goes and how those materials are being managed. And we still don't have we don't have an adopted solid waste management plan. And I think that's
You don't want to have an adopted one. You want to have a draft one that you can comment on.
Well, you want to have an adopted one eventually, right?
Right. But you want to be part of the process. We, in Warren County, I live in Washington, but I'm working in Warren with this group. And in Warren County, the plan was just released to the public on Tuesday.
Right.
And we'll be meeting on Friday to talk about what our what kinds of comments we want to make and how we're going to develop energize the community to comment, and how we're going to reach out to the newspaper,
right,
so that we can make a splash and
our solid
gain
waste
some traction.
It's been a draft since 2011. So
no.
Yeah. So we have had plenty.
That's weird.
Yeah, it's weird. But so on that note, we should really kind of maybe have some
wrap up.
thoughts. Yeah, because first of all, Tracy, I can't thank you enough for making time for us with all that you do. And we will probably have a lot of follow-up questions. This is a topic that I think is like we said, it's complicated. It's not simple, and we're trying to make it more simple to understand at least the process here. In this case, what we're consuming, what we're throwing out, where it goes, and all of the things in between. People can have different interests in chipping away at this issue. But I want to thank you for today and for all of your introductions. And Jenny might have some closing thoughts too, but we would love for you to also end us on a note of on a hopeful note, in terms of, I mean, maybe even something you're seeing in your community, something to help us to gear up and is this the
Well, I will just say that we brought Neil Seldman to the Glens Falls area in September, and in around that time I was recruiting people for a zero waste committee, and I don't know, maybe 75 people showed up for his talk, and the local daily newspaper did an editorial like the day before urging local officials to go and hear him, which blew me away. And then the next day we had a training, for a half-day training in a Unitarian church, and I counted like 20 people who had signed up. We had almost 40 as a result of his talk. So, and it gave people a framework to start thinking about it and realize that something different might be possible. And we now, the committee is formally 20, and probably 8 to 10 people show up on our Zoom calls. But people are feeling really good about working together. And most of these people didn't know very much, less than a year ago. So there's a great deal that's possible. People are really excited about the things they're working on, and they're taking initiative and doing research, and people even were working on a grant. I mean, it's like, so, don't imagine that people aren't interested. There are a lot of people that find this a tangible way they could do something useful.
To realize that the elected and appointed officials, that the public is not lazy, and they're we all want to help. We want to plug in. It's very difficult with the mechanisms that we have to do that. Jenny, were you going to say
Yes,
something?
well, yes, go
Oh
ahead.
yeah, I just wanted to say, if people want to get involved locally, I think one great way to be involved is to follow what the Energy and Environment Committee of the Ulster County Legislature is doing. And in fact, in 2019, in the fall, they did put out their new draft solid waste management plan. I sent the link to you, Rebecca, and that's the one I believe Neil Feldman was commenting on.
No.
And I think they haven't, I don't think they've fully closed the input process, because it probably began at a point when we then started shutting down. So I think it's
Oh, yeah.
out, and that's not the one? Okay, well, they did put out a new one.
There's another
So
draft.
we'll find it and put it up on the page.
Yeah.
But I believe there's still an opportunity to participate. And in fact, at the beginning of each term, the legislature appoints new people to various committees. And I think the pool could get larger. More people could show up and try to participate in some of these committees. Not obviously the standing committees of the legislature, but there are opportunities to participate, for example, on the committee that created the solid waste management plan, because they bring in people from the outside to help with that sort of thing.
Mm-hmm. And I think it's also possible for citizens to get together and interface as much as they can with UCRA and whoever, and say, we want to explore something that you haven't looked at, and here's some ideas we have, and here's some models, and blah, blah, et cetera.
Yeah,
people can create.
They're very open to that.
Yeah, so, and that can get people, give people more ownership and more deeply engaged.
Well,
I mean, it's been really interesting thinking about, okay, so which elected and appointed officials do we want to work with, and how can we work with them? And, so,
well,
and I'm sure that's kind of possible. It's probably much more open in Ulster County than in Warren County.
Well, yeah, I mean, it's nice. One of the things that was nice to see in Neil's report, and I know that he's, worked with a lot of communities, is expressing that Ulster County is very sophisticated on this subject.
Mm-hmm.
We're doing a lot of, very progressive and good initiatives here. And sometimes you can forget where you live. You're so, engaged in the day to day. So it's nice to hear that from the outside. And
it's so easy to make mistakes in this field, because there's so much misinformation coming from the waste corporations, and in some cases the government, like the government of the state of New York pushing incineration for a few decades. So it's
that is on the tip of people's tongues around here, unfortunately, as well as finding sites for landfills. And so that's why I think now is the time for the community to engage and to learn more. It's so much easier that way, and I don't know how that will all manifest, but this hopefully will be a starting point for some. And Tracy, we thank you for your time today.
Well, thank you for your interest. It's actually one of the most inspiring things is to see that people are interested. And I will send you the link for Paul Connett because Paul Connett, I mean, what he says about landfills is yes, there may need to be a landfill for the residual, for the stuff that's left over that no one knows what to do with. But there should be a research program at the entrance to the landfill to see what's going into the landfill, to come up with ideas of what to do with the different kinds of items and materials.
Agreed.
So it's a challenge rather than a dumping ground. And he has a fresh perspective on everything. And someone commented at the end, this was a really hopeful presentation. So just a plug to watch that when we release it.
Thank you, Tracy, and we'll be sure to share it.
Yes, well, thank you. Thank you for your steadfast work all these years and flexibility to move into issues as they come up.
Yeah, that's for sure. Having to be nimble. You got to be.
Yes, so have a lovely evening, and it was great talking to both of you.
You too, Tracy. Good night.
Thank you. Nice to meet
Good
you.
night.
Thank you for
Good
your
night,
work.
Rebecca and Jenny.
All right, we're back. Jenny, thanks for being on tonight's call with me. What are
Thank
your
you. This is a great topic.
Such a great topic. It's a huge topic. I'm realizing trying to get broad with it is okay, but it's very difficult to do. What are some of your impressions after hearing Tracy?
I think we need for people to take a deeper dive into garbage. I really think that it's time for the public to recognize how much it costs us, and not only where it's going, because it's going nowhere, it's staying with us, basically. And if there's some way that people could just become a little bit more aware of not only where it goes, but what they could do about that, I think it would help us a great deal, and it would not only save us money, but really make for a more sustainable future. So, I mean, that goes without saying. But there are ways that people can get involved, and I think we should put that up on our webpage, because there are committees and plans and activities that we could be pushing for and participating in further. And that's really the purpose of this show, is to get people involved in the process. And this is one that touches everyone.
Yeah. The water analogy comes back. I mean, even any infrastructure, wastewater, drinking water, garbage, just there's this sense of entitlement. You pay whatever you're paying and you expect the services that you have, but without a real awareness of how those things occur, what's required in order to make water come to your home, and making sure your water is safe from industrial or building up around the drinking water supply, or our wastewater going out into the Hudson River, which at one point in time was sensible, but it's still occurring, and it's not the best way. It's expensive, but we're not talking about these things, garbage, and where it goes, and the things that we consume, and it's kind of piling up really on the public, I think. Another pun, but I really think it's true. And if anything, asking Tracy for a silver lining, um, I'm a gal who doesn't mind, getting down into the nitty gritty of something, and sticking with it. But I mean, it's a real long game situation. It's not like a quick fix. And we need the public. and the public's engagement. And we need the government to support those systems that help the public
Right.
to participate. And
Right, that was a key point that she made, is that it's really not just a quick fix, in the sense that not any one individual can, and unfortunately that feels disheartening, but it really is a structural problem. So it's going to take a certain amount of awakening, and we have so many awakenings happening right now.
yeah,
This is just yet another that is needed.
but we can do it. I mean, we got to face what's true, and there's just no, what do they say? There's no way, what's that saying? I really love it. The only way, oh, well, it's the end of the day. The only way something is through. The only way, do you know that saying? My mother would know it. She's the queen of
You mean
saying.
about changing the world?
No, not about that. Just dealing with something.
Be the change?
No, 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 no. Anyway, I'll find the quote and put it up. It's a good one. And it's
Okay.
about, there's no avoiding the work, that any issue entails. And
Yeah.
we can't do it all, but we should all do a little bit. And hopefully tonight this has been helpful. I know I learned a lot. I always do.
Me too.
And
Well, she's so dedicated. She started 2 nonprofits while she was still in school.
yeah, there's also this really interesting local law that she was involved in creating. I have it here, and the gist of it is that in the town of Argyll, they did a local law regulating the site selection, design, operation. Let's see, I gotta make this a little bit bigger. Operation, closure, and post-closing of solid waste management facilities. But what's interesting about this law, and that we should also share, because it's an interesting model, and this would more so apply to construction and demolition, in parts of upstate where there's a lot of it from New York City being moved around, and where they're looking for a place to put it. And in this local law, they prohibit outside, they only allow as much waste from the outside that they produce on the inside. So, we were talking about that a little bit too with municipal waste, that, in some cases, landfills want as much as they can get because they're going to make more money, right? And that's not what we really want to be doing, So this is an interesting model, different sort of solid waste problem, but it shows what, I mean, she worked on this, and shows what community members can do when they work with their elected officials to find solutions. So lots to think about, Jenny, and I look forward to our show next week. And I think we're going to take a little vacation after next week, enjoy some downtime in the summer months, and think through some more topics to bring forward to the public. So I will see you next week, and I will probably talk to you tomorrow.
Thank you, as ever, for leading this wonderful program.
You got it. Thanks for being my cohort, as always, as you always are. You're always there, Jenny. Thank you. The citizen's heart right there. Have a good night.
Good night.